He's a contemptible little twerp.
Frankly, he has not won an election since before I was born.
So James Carville, who is an insufferable Democratic Party strategist who is frequently wrong about basically every single thing that he says, is fighting with the current Vice DNC Chair David Hogg about David Hogg's plan to spend $20 million primarying incumbent Democrats in safe blue districts who he believes aren't doing enough to fight Donald Trump. Now, even though David Hogg's plan is to target older Democrats because he wants a generational change, he says it's not really about age, and in the New York Times, he's quoted saying that the plan is to make room for a new generation to step up and help make sure that we have the people that are most acutely impacted by a lot of issues that we are legislating on that are actually going to live to see the consequences of this. And he adds, more than anything, it is, do you want to roll over and die or do you want to fight? And too many people look at our party right now and feel like we want to roll over and die. Now, while he hasn't announced who he's planning to target yet, his plan is to take on Democrats who coast by on seniority by doing nothing. And this is seemingly a repudiation of James Carville's strategy, which is for Democrats to roll over and play dead and basically do nothing. And if it sounds like I'm being uncharitable in describing Carville's strategy, those are his words, not mine. In a guest essay for the New York Times, Carville argues, with no clear leader to voice our opposition and no control in any branch of government, it's time for Democrats to embark on the most daring political maneuver in the history of our party. Roll over and play dead. And he goes on to explain that he doesn't think there's much Democrats can do anyway, so if they just sit back and watch Republicans destroy the country, then they'll also destroy themselves and embolden Democrats. And in the next election cycle, Americans will inevitably come running back to Democrats with open arms, assuming, that is, that we still have free and fair elections in this country. Now, this quote-unquote strategy is idiotic for obvious reasons, but a lot of Democrats seem to agree with Carville's approach because they're already not doing anything. So if they say, oh, well, it's a strategy for me to sit on my ass and not fight Donald Trump, that makes them look better. David Hogg, however, is using his position as vice chairman to let these do-nothing Democrats know that if they don't fight, they're out. And it's expectedly ruffled some feathers within the party. Axios reports that House Democrats are pissed, saying it's inappropriate for the DNC vice chair to threaten incumbents, and others are anonymously calling it a circular firing squad, while members like Hillary Scholten, who could be one of his targets, I guess, accused him of doing this for online clicks. And I've got to say, seeing their tantrums and how entitled they think they are to their seats demonstrates why they should be primaried. But Democratic Party leadership has always shielded corrupt, incompetent Democrats from primary challengers. So now that David Hogg is shaking things up from within, they don't know what to do or how to respond, since people in his position have traditionally protected people like them. And even former party leaders have come out to denounce David Hogg's plan, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the notoriously corrupt former DNC chair who was forced to resign in shame after she was caught sabotaging Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. But on MSNBC, she ironically decided to talk about the virtues of leadership and scold David Hogg about what he should be focused on as a member of leadership.
Well, our job is, when you're an officer of the DNC or an office holder of the Democratic Party, like I am, our job is to make sure that we can go to bat for the American people every single day, and politically that we're able to return to the majority. And that is the first, second, and third goal of achievement for November of 2026. And the pathway to winning the 3 seats that we have to do to make Hakeem Jeffries the Speaker of the House of Representatives, which I am confident we will do, is through districts that are marginal. We have to make sure that voters understand we're on their side, and the Republicans are on the side of billionaires and wealthy corporations and people who want to take their rights away and don't believe in democracy.
That's rich coming from her of all people, since part of the reason why she had to resign in the first place was because she tried to subvert democracy in the 2016 Democratic Party primaries. And while Republicans are obviously orders of magnitude more corrupt than Democrats overall, Democrats are still very much so corrupt. They're still beholden to their corporate donors. Democrats like her in particular prioritize their donors in the payday loan industry over her own constituents, and that is part of the reason why so many Americans just don't trust Democrats either. They win elections simply because they're not Republicans. That's it. But nobody's excited to vote for Democrats most of the time. They win because they're not as bad as Republicans. And David Hogg acknowledges this, and he wants to raise the bar. He understands that the party can't just skate by every single election simply because they're the lesser of two evils. At some point, you have to actually give people a compelling alternative to Republicans to break this death spiral that we're in. And that's what sets him apart from all the other leaders and strategists who are coming out of the woodwork to denounce him. And I think that he had a great response to all of the people who are saying this is a terrible idea.
Let me let you address some social media criticism you've gotten. Matt Bennett from the Clinton-Gore era. This is insane behavior. John Anzalone, pollster most recently for President Biden. $20 million should be spent on swing state legislative races, meaning state legislative races, and down ballot, not on this. Steve Shale, a Florida Democratic strategist, saying the DNC's vice chair should be focused on this kind of engagement, meaning engaging in places in battleground states where Democrats have lost ground, not over which Dem in a plus 20 seat should be primaried and knocked out.
You know, look at the last results of the previous election. Those are the purported experts that brought us here.
That is undeniably true. The same people who were advisors for John Kerry's losing campaign went on to become advisors for Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris's losing campaigns. And the reason why there hasn't been this paradigm shift in the party, aside from corruption, is because the losers who keep feeding Democrats bad advice election after election after election are never purged from the party since they have seniority. The strategists who've been there forever, like James Carville, well, they hold more sway over the newer strategists who have fresh, bold ideas. And the party's deference to seniority is why we see them make insane decisions, like electing Jerry Connolly, somebody who is old and literally dying over AOC, a young, up-and-coming leader who the base seems to like. It's part of the reason why the party has completely stagnated, which he explains in the following clip.
When I was studying history in college, one of the things that I studied was the 1968 DNC. Many of our oldest members of Congress got involved with politics following that DNC and the reforms that came to create the popular primary process that we have today. In our party, we've replaced those those back rooms filled with smoke with a culture of complacency that says that the litmus test of whether or not you should be somewhere isn't based off of how good you are or how effective you are, but how long you've been there. And to me, that's unacceptable. It's anti-democratic, and it's not good for the future of our party.
So the goal for Hogg is to force Democrats to prove their worth. It doesn't matter how long you've represented your district. What matters is what you've done for your district. And on MSNBC, he had a message that I can get behind.
If you were an effective leader and you're listening to this right now and you're a member of Congress, you have nothing to be worried about. And if this brings you anxiety, you should ask yourself why that is, because there are young people out there ready to meet this moment, and our party must do a better job to show our young people that we're here to win them back.
Yeah, so needless to say, some Democrats aren't feeling too safe given the threat from the sitting vice DNC chair, and to that I say, good, fuck him. I like that he's doing this, but as you're going to see in a moment or two, I do have some problems with what he's doing, specifically the lack of clarity. But I love to know that some Democrats who haven't done shit for decades are squirming right now. But with that being said, you know, who he chooses to target does matter. And he just hasn't been very clear about that. Nonetheless, the meltdowns that have ensued following his announcement have been glorious to watch. I'm not going to lie, but no Democrat has shit themselves harder than James Carville, who went on a warpath against David Hogg for daring to suggest that these Democrats who've been there forever should be primaried.
All right, now wait a minute. Let's get this straight. He is the vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and he is talking about raising $20 million to primary other Democrats. Well, when I look at the DNC, ideally it should be an organization that's trying to beat Republicans, not other Democrats. But when you're talking about using the power of the DNC, whatever power it has, it's not very much, but you're using that, and we're paying, Democratic donors are paying David Hogg's salary, they're paying David Hogg's staff, and he wants to run against other Democrats. Well, that's America, run against who the fuck you want to, but don't resign your position. Have guts, man. Have guts. Stand your ground.
What? That doesn't even make sense, James. Why would he resign if he presumably ran for the position that he's in so he'd be able to do what he's doing right now? And why is he a coward if he doesn't do what you say he should do? Are you trying to reverse psychology him, like out of this position, or 5D chess him into not doing this? It makes no sense. But I mean, that kind of brain rot is part of the problem. That's the kind of person who has been representing Democrats for years. So the thought of turnover scares people like him because if his brand of Democrats lose power, he'll become irrelevant. But, aside from just steering the party off of a cliff for decades now, people like him also worked with other party elites to keep the left out of power within the party. And in that same interview, he admitted that he doesn't actually think that the left should have a seat at the table at all. In fact, he thinks that they should just start their own party, go in their own path.
I think these people should get their own party. Don't call it anything Democratic. Call it the Socialist Urban Justice Community Unity Party of the whatever. Right. And then after the election, maybe we can have negotiations, or you can, vote for a Democrat to be the speaker if we win. But I actually think that it might be at a point where there are certain elements in a Democratic coalition that we just can't live in the same room with these people, because they actually learned nothing from 2024. They learned nothing from history, and they are hell-bent going this direction. And maybe what we need to do is say, you go, people, go ahead, go, and then we'll see you the Wednesday after the election.
Now, as much as I'd love to have a new left-wing socialist or communist party, he knows that our system is rigged against third parties. So he's trying to bait the left into taking a path to powerlessness, so they marginalize themselves, so that way him and his ilk will be able to maintain their monopoly on the Democratic Party. But that mentality right there, this anti-left mentality, is part of the reason why the Democratic Party has lost credibility with so many people. I mean, think about the way they talk about the left. When it comes to the left, well, maybe we have irreconcilable differences and we should split. But when it comes to neocons and Republicans like Liz Cheney, well, we're Big Ten, so we've got to be open to diverse points of view if we want to win. Never mind the fact that Kamala Harris literally just tried to win with anti-Trump Republicans in lieu of progressives and lost the election. Never mind the fact that James Carville himself recently admitted that Bernie's more progressive populist message would have actually paid off, even if it pained him to admit that Bernie Sanders was right about anything.
Was this an economy election? And if so, is Sanders right that on populist, working class, kitchen table issues, the Dems didn't do enough?
I think Sanders has some of a point here.
Fast forward to today, and his demented brain has already reverted back to homeostasis, and he's not only saying that the party should split with the left, he's straight up attacking people like Bernie Sanders and AOC who are breathing new life into the Democratic Party, which is precisely what it needs right now. Nonetheless, James Carville thinks that they're bad.
Let me make a point about Bernie and AOC. But Bernie run for president twice. He's lost twice. AOC, in her kind, and this guy, David Hogg, they want to run against other Democrats.
Yeah.
They don't run against Republicans. Well, when you beat a Republican, come back and see me, and I will be impressed.
This is the guy who Democrats treat as some sort of a fucking oracle of wisdom when he's demonstrably wrong about everything he says. As Adam Carlson put it on Twitter, AOC outperformed Harris in terms of raw votes and vote share, outran her by 6.7 points against a Republican. Bernie has defeated 13 Republicans, including ousting a Republican incumbent, and the last time Carville advised a campaign that beat a Republican was 29 years ago. But the reason why people like him continue to steer the party in whatever direction they go in, which is usually the wrong direction, is because of seniority, as David Hogg pointed out. But later on in that same clip, Chris Cuomo groups AOC and Bernie Sanders with David Hogg in order to make one of the dumbest false equivalences I have ever heard in my entire life. And the mention of David Hogg then triggers Carville, who then rants about how David Hogg should be sued. So buckle up, because this one is quite the doozy.
What you see with Bernie and AOC right now is MAGA playbook. MAGA playbook. Make the masses angry. Dave Hogg, that's MAGA playbook. Go after your own and have a purity test. But what beats you, if you become that, you're not going to beat it.
Right. Well, I don't think that most of the Democrats are that. And maybe we need to have a schism. Maybe we can form a governing coalition. This happens every time in parliamentary things where you come in, you say, okay, you want to be part of our coalition. But when they spend all their time running against us, by the way, why don't somebody sue David Hogg? He's an officer of the Democratic National Committee. He is the vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and he's running against other Democrats. I would like to know, and you went to law school, does he have a fiduciary duty toward Democrats? If you work for News Nation, you can't promote CNN. That's because you work for somebody else. You have a fiduciary duty to your employer, which anybody can understand. He's being paid to run against other Democrats. I think it's an outrage. I don't know if I have standing, but I might give the DNC $10 and sue him. He's a contemptible little twerp.
Okay, that was a lot of stupidity, so I guess we'll just try to unpack it in chronological order because I don't know how else to address it. First of all, Bernie and AOC, they're not making people angry, Chris Cuomo. They're already angry. People are mad, and Bernie and AOC are trying to harness that anger so people are mad at oligarchs, the people who are actually causing their pain and suffering, and not immigrants or trans people who are not causing their pain and suffering. But speaking of, using the MAGA playbook, why don't you talk to your sex pest brother about that? Because he's functionally as close to MAGA as a Democrat can be without switching parties. Second of all, Carville, again, proposes that leftists go their own way and floats the idea of some sort of a governing coalition like they have in parliamentary systems. The problem with that idea, James, is that as much as I would love that, we're not in a fucking parliamentary system. So you're asking the left to effectively give up all of their leverage by leaving the party. And while I'm not convinced personally that the Democratic Party can even be reformed at this point, I'm even less convinced that Democrats would ever agree to some sort of a power-sharing agreement with a new leftist party when they won't even share power with the leftists in their own party. Finally, James Carville floated the idea of suing David Hogg for, I guess, having a strategy that he doesn't like, which is brilliant. Listen, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, as DNC chair, literally violated the DNC's own neutrality clause by colluding with Clinton to sabotage Sanders. And do you want to know what the DNC's defense was in court when they were sued for that? They argued that the DNC was a private company. So if the party wanted to go back to picking candidates in smoke-filled back rooms, they could do that, and there's fuck all you could do about it. So the idea that now you think it's the time to sue the Democratic Party or a leader in particular for malfeasance is pretty funny. Now, David Hogg responded to Carville's tantrum, and what he had to say was perfect.
What's his plan to deal with our 27% approval rating? That's my question to him. The fact of the matter is right now, our party is in a crisis. We are seeing people lose faith in our party. They're losing faith in democracy across the country. And we need to make sure that we're getting people to vote for Democrats, not simply because we're not Donald Trump, but because we have a better message, a better option for them. Not simply the less bad of two options, as I think Carville tries to promote when he says, well, we just shouldn't say anything. Carville believes in a politics of being timid, of hiding. I believe in fighting. And that is what people want to see right now from the Democratic Party. And we just saw an example of that with Senator Van Hollen going to El Salvador to say, we need to meet with this man. And yes, Democrats obviously are in the minority right now. But let's be clear, we cannot win back the majority if we do not convince the American people that our party offers something that isn't just not Donald Trump, but is substantially better than Donald Trump, that fights to lower costs for Americans across the country, whether it's healthcare, housing, or the foundational building blocks of the American dream that feels so out of reach for people, or addressing gun violence. We can't simply just hide, as Carville repeatedly promotes, not to mention the fact that, frankly, he has not won an election since before I was born. I think it's time for some new voices in our party.
Well said. And that's part of the reason why he's trying to promote generational change, because the same people who've been dictating the direction of the party for decades are responsible for the predicament that we're in. People are desperate because things aren't getting better, and neither party is doing enough to address people's material needs. Hence why people are becoming susceptible to radicalization, because they're so desperate. The neoliberalism embraced by both parties has hollowed out the middle class and facilitated the rise of fascism that we're all dealing with today. So David is right to think that the same people who got us into this mess aren't going to be the same people to get us out of the mess, since they made the mess in the first place. With that being said, even though David's heart is in the right place, his plan is, quite frankly, ideologically incoherent and at times contradictory. For example, he won't say who isn't fighting enough, but when you ask him which Democrats he thinks are fighting enough, his answer is genuinely fucking puzzling, to put it charitably.
There are great older people in our party that are leading the fight against Donald Trump and have been doing so for nearly a decade at this point, like Congresswoman Pelosi. We also have people, obviously, like Jan Schultz and so many others that are meeting this moment. But the reality is, we know that only 27% of our base is approving of where we are right now as a party. If we had a proportional number of 25 to 30-year-old people in Congress, as we do in the general population, we would have over 40 members under 30, but currently there is only one. That is part of the reason and why we're losing our young voters. And what we have to do to protect our democracy is show our young voters that we are here to use democracy to fight back against the special interests that are killing the American dream and fight back the special interests that have put them through school shootings.
So in one breath, he says it's not about age, it's about effectiveness and a generational change and getting rid of Democrats beholden to special interests. But in another breath, he's praising Nancy Pelosi and Jan Schakowsky, even though both of them are antithetical to his own stated goals. Now, on one hand, I think that Nancy Pelosi is somewhat more effective at fighting Republicans, at least compared to Hakeem Jeffries, but that's a really low bar. But in terms of special interests, you can't tell me it's about getting special interests out of the party and then say, oh, Nancy Pelosi is somebody who's an example of a good Democrat. As if she's not beholden to special interests. As if she's not doing insider trading and getting rich while nothing changes in the fucking country. Listen, what makes it even worse for David is that Nancy Pelosi is currently being primaried by a younger, more progressive Democrat named Shaikat Chakrabarti, who's AOC's former chief of staff, and Jan Schakowsky is also being primaried by a Gen Z progressive activist and journalist, Kat Abu-Ghazala. Both of these young candidates aren't taking any money from special interests. They're fighting relentlessly against Trump and the Republicans. In fact, Kat launched her campaign calling on Democrats to stop being cowards, and they would both represent the generational change that David Hogg says he wants, yet he seemingly is embracing the out-of-touch incumbents that those younger candidates are running against. So what exactly is the criteria here? Maybe some more examples will help clear that up, you would think, right? Wrong, because the more examples that he gives, the more confusing it gets.
I want more people like Congressman Maxwell Frost, right, who has helped to lead the charge in Congress against gun violence, helped to push, the former Biden administration to create the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Or people like Senator Van Hollen, who are literally going to El Salvador to say this man needs to come back. It looks like people like Cory Booker, who, mind you, did primary somebody to get to that position. It looks like people, in many ways, like Hakeem Jeffries, who primaried multiple people to get to that position.
Now, here's where we start to lose the fucking plot entirely. If Hakeem Jeffries is a leader that you look up to, who embodies the effectiveness that you're supposedly looking for in Democratic Party leaders, then you don't know what you're looking for. Jeffries specifically faced backlash for not doing enough to fight Donald Trump and had the audacity to ask what leverage they had. And Jeffries isn't just ineffective at fighting Republicans, he is a collaborator with fascist Republicans and literally held hands with them in support of a rogue state committing a genocide. Yeah, but let's not primary him. He's actually a good example of a leader doing the good work to fight Republicans, according to David Hogg. Now, speaking of special interests, which David purports to care about, Hakeem Jeffries supports the genocidal state of Israel because he is one of their top recipients. And on that note, Silicon Valley oligarchs were one of the first groups that Hakeem Jeffries reached out to after the election as leader in order to mend fences with them. Not with voters, but with Silicon Valley oligarchs. Not to mention, he scolded Democrats like Al Green for daring to disrupt Donald Trump's joint address to Congress. But that's your good guy, David? That's an example of a Democrat who's fighting Republicans effectively? Are you fucking kidding me? By your own criteria, he should be one of your first targets, but instead he's an example to you of someone who's doing a good job at fighting Trump and the Republicans. Make it make sense, because it doesn't. Now, he also cites Cory Booker, because Cory Booker gave a 25-hour speech, and that's great and all, great way to use the bully pulpit, which is what we want, sure. The problem is that right after that speech, he voted against a resolution to cut off weapons to Israel. So if you're going to talk the talk, you better be able to walk the walk. And on that note, Cory Booker doesn't support policies like Medicare for All, which is one of the main reasons why so many people are frustrated with Democrats, because they're out of touch with their own base and not offering a compelling alternative to Republicans, which is something that you say you want, David. But to be fair, he also names Maxwell Frost and Chris Van Hollen as other examples of good Democrats, and even though I have my criticisms of both of them, they are better Democrats for sure. But again, you're not supporting Democrats like them who are primarying do-nothing incumbents. What gives? I mean, like, if you want more Democrats like Frost and Van Hollen, why would you seemingly snub Chakrabarti and Abu-Ghazala? I mean, we're kind of all over the place here ideologically, which begs the question, what is David Hogg's litmus test? Because age, effectiveness, and ideology don't seem to be part of his criteria. And this was a question that was asked by an unhinged K-Hive influencer who called on Hogg to explain himself. He then went on to go on one of his unhinged rants that he's known for, but the core of his question that he's asking is still good nonetheless. So let's hear him out.
I want to know specifics. What is the litmus test? Okay, are we doing this based off of voting record? Are we doing this based off of progressivism? Are we doing this based off of age? Are we doing this based off of gender? Race? Because historically speaking, Justice Democrats have continuously attacked black legislators, and I'm not here with the motherfucking shit. I'm not here with the prejudice, progressive shit. If that's what the fuck you're doing, we're going to have a problem. Because a lot of y'all will sit here and say, well, it's based off of performance. So are we basing it off of who's popular, or are we actually basing it off of performance? Because a lot of people just go off of the performative nature on it, because not everybody can be as popular as a Jasmine Crockett, even though she's also doing the motherfucking work. But however, a lot of people didn't know who the fuck Al Green was until he acted a damn fool on the State of the Union, rightfully damn so. A lot of y'all would probably be looking at Al Green and with his age and being the fact that he's held that damn seat for 20 damn years, thinking that, oh, if he doesn't retire, are we going to primary this black man? Even though this black man has done a well for his motherfucking district, I'm talking about delivering $100 million motherfucking dollars to his damn constituents. I want to know, what are you going to do, and are you going to target black people? Because again, historically speaking, y'all already tried to primary Hakeem Jeffries before he was even the minority leader. And I'm also looking in the motherfucking comments that people are trying to hold Hakeem Jeffries to the most impossible motherfucking standards that they didn't even hold Nancy to. But however, Hakeem Jeffries was able to do his damn job by whipping the votes to vote against the continuing resolution. Why the fuck is he gonna have to pay the motherfucking price and pay for the fucking crimes of damn Chuck Schumer? Why not hold that white bitch to that motherfucking standard? How about that?
Why not both? See, even though I'm also confused about David Hogg's criteria, it's idiotic to assume that he's specifically only targeting black members of Congress. Why is that your automatic assumption? It makes no sense. Now, to be fair to him, the reason why he's worried about this is because he claims that Justice Democrats targeted black and brown incumbents, but to be unfair to him, he's dead fucking wrong, and he's making that up. It's just not true. Justice Democrats were disproportionately from minority communities themselves. So if the incumbent that they were targeting happened to be black, they were too. And I think that the organization that he's thinking of that targets black and brown members of Congress is AIPAC, who just spent millions of dollars to replace Jamal Bowman with a racist white dude who's effectively a Republican. In fact, this same person was making jokes about that, as if it wasn't despicable that a foreign lobbying group was able to unseat a black man for daring to condemn genocide. So, I mean, drop the bullshit. You know that this is about ideology, not identity, and we can all see through your cynical weaponization of identity politics. But putting aside that, he still makes a good point. It's hard to gauge effectiveness because the most vocal Democrats aren't necessarily the most effective. And his example of Al Green was a good example. Credit to him. Now, we're talking about him because David Hogg responded to him, which is why I feel like I got to give you the context and share his video. And David Hogg's response, however, didn't really help to clarify things. He says, Al Green is one of the best members we have. We need to win a House majority and elect Hakeem Speaker. The Black Caucus is the conscience of Congress, and we have to expand it. Okay, but you're still not being clear. The difference between Al Green and Hakeem Jeffries is enormous. One is an excellent representative who has a proven record of fighting for the people in his district, whereas the other is a corrupt charisma vacuum who doesn't give a shit about people in his district. Does Hakeem Jeffries get a pass because he's younger and I guess represents generational change? I mean, the lack of specificity here speaks volumes. And look, while I support this plan in theory, the details matter. And I'll give him credit. I think that disrupting the status quo from within is a genius ploy. I wish that the left thought of this sooner, but it's not going to amount to the change you say you want if we end up with the same soulless corporate Democrats who don't actually stand for anything. We don't need new faces to represent the same old status quo. We need new faces to tear out the old status quo from the roots and replace it with a new one. So while I am enjoying the catfight between him and James Carville, admittedly, you have to understand that the reason why people like James Carville have dominated the Democratic Party for decades is because they are actually committed to an ideological project. They don't believe that the Democratic Party should return to FDR-style politics. People like James Carville are committed to the continuation of Clinton-era neoliberalism, where privatization and corporate profits are prioritized over robust public services preferred by the base. They think that incrementalism and governing from the center isn't just pragmatic, but intrinsically good. So in the end, I don't know why James Carville is being so hysterical about this, because even though David Hogg is offering a competing alternative to Republicans, he very clearly doesn't have a cohesive ideological vision to compete with Democrats, which just means that this project is bound to lead us right back to where we started at the beginning.